So my name is Keith Martin Smith. I'm the author most recently of When the Buddha Needs Therapy, and I'm here today to talk about a new book called Three Steps into Oneness. And Thomas, could you give us a little overview of that and yourself? And
Yes, my name is Thomas Rüedi, so I'm the author, and I was lucky to have um, Keith coming along with me into my first publishing an English book. So it was a challenge for me, but I think I'm quite satisfied how it turned out, and so. I'm glad to see you tonight to this talk and to have give people some ideas what the book is about.
Mhm.
And since we did already a book teaser, I think that is out in YouTube too. So there's a very short version also too for people that would have very little time and maybe would like to listen to this interview later.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, one of the things, so there's a bunch of things that struck me about the book. But one of the things that we talked about when we were working together, which makes it quite unusual, is that we decided that it was best to leave it in, I would say, a particular dialect of English. So rather than trying to rewrite the book into perfectly, um, acceptable, grammatically perfect Western writing, we made the choice to leave it kind of more in your own voice, the way that you actually speak. And I think
Yeah.
that's actually one of the things that makes it really unique because you get a sense as you read the book that it's someone that has a different perspective than necessarily a native English speaker. And to me, it gives the work just a different kind of freshness and a different kind of vitality. Maybe you could just speak a little bit about that choice to not have someone change the book into sort of grammatically perfect English.
Yeah, I think there is a connection for me for many years already. I have a connection to the English language, uh, and I found out that there are some very important things to tell. I like to tell it in English, and it's might be a little bit funny, but it there seemed to be a a language coming with the English that is different than I would speak it out in Swiss German dialect, something, or it would be something different. And it seems to be, to me, it's a sort of kind of spiritual language that shows at that point. That is a mixture between like what I feel like I need to express in English,
Right.
um, and what also there is also a part that I like to be quite mystic, So it's not intellectual, but it's both. So I think these both aspects. This is like one of these polarities I'm talking about in the book is there is something like more cognitive, more intellectual, more mental, and there's another level more like mystic, more like meditative. You don't get into it if you don't relax into a certain kind of meditation, something.
Right, right. So yeah, let's dive into that a little bit. I mean, one of the things I found that made the book really interesting to me was that from my view, you sort of do a modern version of the Mahayana's two truths doctrine, where you really get into sort of a relative view on one side and relative spirituality, but in a really integral, nuanced way, where you include indigenous beliefs, you include Western beliefs, you include history, you include psychology, all this stuff that would be sort of in the relative dualistic everything is in relation to everything else, which is what, the Mahayanists figured out, 2000 years ago. But then you also talk about the idea of an absolute reality or an absolute truth as well. And you really, I think, very gracefully make the point that these two truths coexist. And it's not a matter of one or the other, but it's this idea of a both and. And maybe you could just speak a little bit about the inspiration and the goal as you set out to sort of tell this story in a way that's really relevant to us in the 21st century.
Yes, I thought over this point already before this interview, and I said I would say that one point is for me is elderhood. I think elderhood means it's I reached an age that I'm in a position I would like to share some insights of my life, and there is a like a relative insight, like living in this world and for like 65 years, and the other is there is a like a spiritual life that is going along, coming along with this, and because I was interested from since early ages to go into the spiritual. There was a kind of hunger inside me to 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 uh, to look for spiritual, treasures, and to find them out, outside of the original Christian education I had, And I would say one of the main points in my book is I would say there's a lack of a kind of what it means. There is relative wisdom. So most would say wisdom is something that is related to absolute level or to great sageness, but what I find is and that is what we probably will be talking about too, is the first step of the three steps in the book is really to take care about this relative level, seeing the normal life we live, but also seeing that inside this, I call it the horizontal level in my book. There is a vertical level too, because there is a vertical level is mainly saying there is a wisdom level too, and the wisdom is coming from absolute and relative. So it's not only wisdom is only in the absolute. So it's this is something important I wanted to bring in.
Yeah, and I would encourage people, I'm sure they can online, they can probably see the table of contents of this book. But it's really interesting because the table of contents really helps to break down what you're talking about. And so you start really by talking about the idea of really needing to embrace the relative in a way that I would say what you're really pointing us towards is something that's sort of holistic and integrated,
Yeah.
and acknowledging multiple points of view, including, I would say, cleaning up some of the Western oversights of reductionism and colonialism and these other things, capitalism, these sort of movements, if you will, that have clearly moved into a toxicity and a destructiveness,
Yeah.
not just
Yeah.
for people
Yeah.
on the outside, but
Yeah.
also for us on the inside, as we've internalized a lot of these concepts. And that's led to sort of a psychic or soul sickness, I think, is really what you're saying in some of these ways. And so as I read that first level, what you do is you really talk about the relative. The step into the relative is a step of acknowledging that it is the relative, but finding as much wholeness and completeness as we can in that level. And maybe you could just talk about that a little bit, how you
Yeah.
propose that.
I think a good point is to talk about polarity. I think at the first step we have what I call the minor polarities. And I think a good example for minor polarity is and the need of having both at the same time, or working together is, when we breathe in, but we need to breathe out too. And then it turns again and again and again, and there's no point to do only one of these. So it's the balance of breathing in and breathing out that makes somebody healthy. I think breath is very important, as we can see in many like yogic traditions too. So I think that might be a good example to show what it means that I say if these polarities meet in a balanced perspective, then there is the opportunity to meet relative wisdom. I think this is I think this is the point of the first step. Um, and another point is to have to start to discriminate a little bit between polarities within all that kind of horizontal level life, the normal life we do. I mean, only balancing already with breathing or with relaxing and being into action is very important. And this is why, because I'm a holistic doctor, originally, had an office like 32 years about where I've been working with. Originally, I'm a dentist, but I specialized in holistic treatments and holistic work. So there was a good point to get a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge about how things have to get balanced in this in this normal world. This is what I would probably say. This is mainly something like the first step we can see in the book.
Right. So the first step then, really what you're talking about, is this idea of balancing the relative level, which we've already talked about, right? Psychology, ecology, different forms of spirituality, from indigenous to
Yeah.
Christian, the being aware of our mindsets, being conscious of our mindsets and our values and what those are
Yeah.
doing to the world and to ourselves, and bringing these into balance. And you give a lot of examples from indigenous cultures, from decolonization, from nature, and from ecology, and and you really tie it together in a beautiful way where I sort of see you I think that's probably the most accessible part of the book, because I think a lot of us that are interested in this material, what you're really doing is you're bringing together a lot of different elements and helping us to see a much bigger picture, to hold this bigger picture in which we can then find this relative wisdom, this sort of holistic view inside of it.
Yeah, I think that's what I mean about when I talk about a holistic worldview. A holistic worldview is quite a broad and a vast view to see things, the positive things, the problematic things, the things that we have to care, or we run into troubles. And yeah, and after all, I think talking about spirituality and the absolute, if we don't care about the first step work within the relative, it's no point, because you
Right.
don't have a basic, you have something basic to rely on, or to and I mean, when
Well,
you did.
would you say that's kind of a version of spiritual bypassing there? If we try to ignore the relative and go straight to the absolute, then we're not complete humans in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I brought into the preface, as you remember, saying there is the with the example of the labyrinth,
Right.
and the labyrinth, is not the same as a maze, because labyrinth is always a path to follow. There is in the maze you get lost, and well,
The point of the maze is to get out.
and you just get caught somewhere, and you have to turn around and you try again and again. So it's this try and error stuff,
Right.
and going the labyrinth is something more, something like guided within, or with guided by wisdom, I would say, more and more, and where you can meet this, so and the maze means there we can meet people. They do like 20 years of spiritual practice, meditation, and really serious stuff, and still feel very funny not reaching anywhere, And there, on the other hand, there are these guys. I mean, there are lots of these guys. Just stick with the relative, with money, with power, with sex, with anything you can consume, and and there you can get lost, and I mean, in the end, when you lie on your bed by dying, you might ask yourself, what was this it,
Right. Right.
That's what I mean by going in the maze, and with the labyrinth, there is this is only possible if you have a spiritual access.
Right. Well, I think that's a great transition to go then from the first step to oneness to the second step to oneness. So the first step to oneness, you talked about balancing these minor polarities. And
Yeah.
the second step, you say we need to balance the major polarity. So maybe tell us again just a simple example of a minor polarity, then let's transition to the major polarities, just to make sure people are tracking.
Yeah, minor polarities. It's a plural. It's everywhere you meet. It's dark and it's dark and bright. It's cold and hot. It's
Angry
you
or
know
happy,
yeah,
grief or
anything like
yeah. Mhm.
anything like this. And then when we move over to the major polarity, it's a singular. That means there is a relative wisdom meeting absolute wisdom,
Okay.
and there, um, this is quite a different story, because you have to really get into the first step to find this kind of treasure of relative wisdom, and then, in my view, and the view of the book is, then you're ready to meet the absolute, and then you have, yeah, and there is another balance, in the vertical, yeah, um, and I think that's this is another view on basically, I'm coming from Buddhism, like Vajrayana Buddhism, Dzogchen. I'm
Yep.
Dzogchen practitioner for quite a while already, and still I feel there's lots of meaning, and there's lots of incredible power in these traditional, spiritual, wisdom traditions, and what I find is very important is, indigenous traditions, religious traditions are also wisdom tradition, as all others too. So it's important to do that step, to bring it on, on eye level to every other,
Yep.
and yeah. So second step is since there we meet the absolute. I think um, what I was talking about is also about the integral view, and I think in the first step, I mean, it's integral philosophy is great, is really completely covering everything up, and the individual inside and outside, and the collective inside outside stuff, you have quite a broad picture, and then the developmental stuff in there. I think it's a beautiful and really meaningful, new, powerful expression of what means to be holistic today. Holistic philosophy. This is, and then I think in the end, then this has to meet then the absolute. So because the absolute is something we have to be introduced to, I think, most of us, we have to be introduced to from people inside these powerful ancient traditions that they take us with them in their airplane to above the clouds. We have a little we have a little sight into the blue sky.
Right, right. Well, in this part of the book, you talk about, some of the polarities between the divine feminine and divine masculine. And you
Mhm.
also talk about a simultaneous balance as a major polarity between the relative and the absolute. So maybe you could just talk about, those are big topics, but maybe you could just talk about those a little bit. Like what they mean when they're in balance, what that means from your view.
I think important is um, what I find there's quite a lot of people like myself when I was into Buddhism for many years and within a really structure working these traditional practices. Everything was beautiful, but um, I found I found a lot of people and myself as well um, being getting lost somehow a little bit because the 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 strength of pulling you into this into the absolute level of these traditions is really is something very beautiful to have. But what I find is the relative level um, um, often is some kind of somehow misunderstood as something not important, or something you just step over, and then you leave it behind, and then you forget about it. So it's no point if you just walk after the meditation, you work out into your day. It's no point to forget about, because there you will meet everything. And in the end, you will ask yourself, half an hour after the meditation, why you get so pissed off because you somebody in front of you doesn't move with his car.
Right. So really what you're talking about from what I'm hearing, again, the theme of this book again and again is the integration that, you know, um, if I spend all of my life in the relative, to your point, on your deathbed, you sort of realize that everything that you've put meaning into, everything that you've focused on your whole life is ultimately sort of transparently dualistic and impermanent. But if I focus entirely on the absolute side and I negate the relative side totally, then I'm actually not really living in the world, and you sort of become like a spiritual mummy or something, right? It's like you're sort of removed from life, and to your point, then you find you're at a practice and you're getting angry at people, or maybe you're a bad father or a bad husband or a bad wife or whatever it is, because you don't really understand the relative side at all. You're just trying to get away from it. You're sort of dissociating from it psychologically. Would you agree that that's kind of what you're trying to say here?
Yeah, and I think the what is the point about oneness then is if you are able to have these both qualities, but I mean, it's important that we, on step 2, we're talking about the relative level focus on the vertical dimension. So vertical
Mm,
dimension means a spiritual person living in the relative world.
right.
If you don't spiritually, you just forget about step 2 and 3 because it doesn't matter anyway. So
Right. So, and we think of vertical as a sort of like trying to awaken or trying to be in touch with the absolute, and the horizontal being, maybe the relative world of paying my taxes, going to a therapist, working on my shadows and my traumas, doing men's work, that kind of stuff. Yes?
yeah, yeah, of course. But even, since we both do men's work, too, I mean, it's an interesting issue to bring into men's work too. Um, Once I remember when I have been in a retreat, I was bringing up to the Rinpoche, or I just did it myself. I just, you know, having a men's group meet, and to talk about spiritual, like, on the, only with men, because I think there is something different, and there's something more difficult, seems to be too. So, yeah, so it's a, uh, yeah, so this is second step is but also second step must be also we meet the absolute, what with what kind of, spiritual tradition anyway. Could be Buddhism, it could Christianity, it could be Sufism, it could be, anything. That's what I was bringing in the book too, because there are some really interesting, uh, common issues, or common how I say, some common roots,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
these for me meaningful traditions that are not stick, then they don't get stuck with the religion tradition,
Right. Right.
so there is something beyond this, and this is true for Dzogchen. I'm with. This is true for certain kind of, sophistic traditions that they feel themselves beyond Islamic traditions, and
Sure.
they just are inside. They can be put inside Islamic tradition, and they're fine there too. At the same in Buddhism too. It's there's no point not to do this, but it's something what I call coming, you know, in excess,
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, it makes me think of, I remember the great um, Father Thomas Keating, who was a Trappist monk here in the States,
Yeah,
who did a lot of cross religious work with Zen and with Dzogchen practitioners, and
yeah,
and
yeah,
I remember he had a great comment, which was basically something along the lines of, he found that the Trappist monks, that they had far more in common with the Buddhist monks than they did with Christian lay people, because even though the Christian lay people and the Christian monks believed the same things, um, the Christian monks and the Buddhist monks had the same insight about the nature of the absolute, which
ah,
everyday Christians did not. Everyday Christians lived over in the relative realm only, whereas the contemplative monks and the contemplative Buddhists and the contemplative Sufis and the contemplative Jewish people, and the on and on, right? So
yeah.
it seems like if one has a contemplative practice and view to try to penetrate, to be on this vertical axis you talk about, um, the surface practices are less relevant because it's really about the depth of insight.
Yeah, I think in the end, you're talking about, meeting the absolute, and I think that's what I brought as an example in my book. When like I think three people meet about talking about, uh, yeah, it's it's a Christian monk. Then it's a Sufi master, a female Sufi master, and there's a rabbi, you know. And when they
It almost sounds like a joke that you're going to set up. And
yeah,
three guys walk into a bar, a rabbi,
yeah. But interesting is if one of these guys were starting to talk about the absolute, they just started like three words, and everybody's going nodding. Oh yeah, that's it, because it's beyond words. So they felt it, they felt this understanding, this because there's I think this is the same space they share there. Been talking about what might be quite a difference with this I call new view on awakening, is that if the absolute is the enlightenment, you don't have your feet still on the floor. This is what I feel,
so,
because
so in other words, if I'm seeking just the absolute to awaken, then I'm not grounded.
I think as long as we are incarnated, we are, we better have our feet on the floor and
Yep.
and be there and be present and be so I think there's no point to I know I don't understand this being enlightened. I mean, I think most people don't understand this anyway. So there
Sure.
is nothing to understand because it's
Sure.
beyond.
Right. Yeah.
That's what my spiritual master said many times. I mean, in the end, enlightenment is it's not so special as we think so.
Right.
But I mean, anyway, it's very special. But
Well, it's my teacher said he said awakening will take you to your knees, and it's absolutely ordinary. So the same sort of thing.
yeah, and I think when we balance, then relative and absolute wisdom, or this in this like vertical dimension, then where they meet, this kind of like vertical polarity, like heaven and earth,
Right. Awakening and
meeting,
unawake.
there we can find oneness. And for the the structure of this book, then we are going into step 3 as what you could say, and you could say oneness is enlightenment.
Which means the integration of these two truths, the relative and the absolute, holding them both equally true, equally arising, equally important, question mark.
Yeah, it's but it seems to be a state of um, of being in both levels the same time.
Yeah.
I mean, this is something that comes up in the book many times. It's polarities, you know, meet, and then there they are at the same time, like simultaneous. There's nothing separate. You cannot have something separate, one of these separate, when you go into the next level of the next step level.
Mhm.
And in the end of the book, there is a point I say maybe there is and even another polarity, waiting for us, with oneness, to meet. And then there's even a next quality, So it's just a feeling. It's just
Mm.
like it's just like open to, up, there's no limit,
Right. Right.
Mm.
Well, one of the things I really appreciated about the book and continue to appreciate is it's really, I would say, exhaustively researched. It's just for people that are listening, it might sound like these are very high level concepts that we're kind of talking about, but what I would say you've done, Thomas, is you ground the book in a lot of really deeply researched data, which
Yeah.
by way in the relative, for instance, as I mentioned before, but you talk about things like capitalism and colonialisms, but you don't do it in a way that's regressive or self-hating. You do it as an observation with an invitation for us to acknowledge and grow. um, and you're not advocating that we should go back to some past time and do it's about the thrust of the book, which I really enjoyed, is about moving forward and integration, not giving things up and moving backwards to an earlier time or something like that. So it really sits beautifully in the idea of evolution for me, both relative and in the absolute. Evolving our view of each other, evolving our view of the absolute, and bringing that all together.
I think quite a special view might be when I think about people, coming from the integral level, is that I say there is this kind of really powerful and beautiful path you can go with integral in development, like I say, bottom up, just upwards, so.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And I say, because there must be a polarity, there is a top-down development too. So
Right.
it's a top-down means from the absolute.
Right.
If you do some practices with the absolute, like in Dzogchen tradition, you visualize some deities, or you know above above
Right.
yourself, and then you get informed, or you get so it's I think there are two kinds of ways of development. They meet, and I think this is an important point, because there, when you talk about the top-down development, it's mostly like a, how you say, it's more a mystical view. It's more
Right. Right.
I say it's quite difficult to put it into words,
Right.
that should be really covering the meaning, the deep meaning that is in there.
Right. Right. So in other words, the sort of mystical, by definition, is sort of transcendent, transhuman. And so but that must exist in a polarity as well.
Yeah. So I think that's why I think there is this really important, when we have been talking about step one work, really important, beautiful work we can do with going with the integral or integral life practice, or stuff like this. You really go broad and deep and into the relative. Yes.
So body, psyche, shadow,
Yeah.
fitness, food, right?
Yeah.
Ecology, all these things, right? All the
Yeah.
stuff, right? Yeah.
But also there's the relative practices of the traditional, um, you know, um, um, religious system. Like there's lots of techniques you can use from Buddhism, or probably from Christianity, from anything, and yeah. So, and then uh, I think important is, I felt when I was writing the book, is everywhere you meet these kind of polarities on the horizontal, or on the vertical, and this is the deeper structure, very quite simple. it goes about, it's always about, bringing together polarities and have them, practiced or have them lived, simultaneously. And this is there are some points in the book, they go really beyond the mind. If you remember the passage about form,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
I mean it's a little bit out of what we can discuss here, but it really goes beyond mental, beyond um, um, understanding by
Sure.
mind.
Sure, sure. Because any genuine apprehension or experience of the absolute can never just be mental. It has to be a whole, it has to be well, in Zen we would say you feel it in the hollow of your bones. But the idea being that it's like being in love. You know, if you read about being in love, that's very different than if you experience being in love. The experience of being in love is undeniable, totally transformative, and really would be impossible to describe to someone who had never been in love. You could never get the words right. It would never line up right. And it's the
Mm.
same, I think, when we have the experience, the stable experience of the absolute, because it's so utterly transformative, because it happens body, mind, soul, it happens across the whole organism of the human. And and it makes it very difficult. You know, we communicate via language, via this dualistic language, and it creates a paradox when we try to describe something that is inherently non-dual in nature that we're experiencing directly. How do I explain that to someone that doesn't create confusion and separation, right?
Yeah, and I think the paradox goes on in this concept, saying, you know, you should somehow try to do simultaneous. You do some deep um, cognitive work or emotional work within a relative wisdom, and then you connect yourself to the absolute, and this is at the same time. So it's not, if they meet it, not the relative is not vanishing, it's still there. It's a little bit like it, you would see it in a mirror,
Right, right.
it's not so like dominant anymore, and but it needs to be there. Otherwise, this is what I'm trying to bring up in this book. Otherwise, you won't be able to, as an incarnated human being, you won't be able to meet oneness.
Right. Yeah. And again, I just want to point listeners to the care and depth with which this book is written. You know, you really get into some of the cutting edge science around brain science, heart science, gut science. Um, so that, you know, to me, reading this book, it really, I think it gives people a really strong sense of how robust and full the relative actually is, how much there is that is so grounding to learn, how complex we actually are in the relative. And then you do a really powerful job, to me, of speaking of the absolute in a way that's pretty unique, you know, and it's really, I would just say it's in more depth, it's more refined than we're having here because it's the pace is slower with the language in the book, and you're laying things out step by step in a way that I think will give people more of a sense of what the experience is like. That this isn't a book that exists up here. I
Yeah.
think as people read it, they'll really get a sense, they'll get a feeling of what the integration feels like in their body. That it's more of a tour, like a tour guide, than it is a book about something.
Yeah, I mean, this is why, I say, spiritual, true spirituality for me is a tantric. Tantric means it's experience based. So
Right.
there's no way to do it like on a like an intellectual path. So
It's not philosophy.
But still, I think that part on the first step is might be a little bit sutric too, you know,
Mhm.
if you put it into the words like Buddhist words, mind a written text to study, to study information and to reflect on that, and then to go step by step deeper, you know. And maybe, something that is really unique about Dzogchen, people they might know is Dzogchen is saying, and you can get realized, by doing nothing. Just just do it, you know. So
Right.
it's not
Awakening
it
can be absolute and spontaneous.
yeah,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
still I think most of us when I look out into the world, in these war zones, I think there's not a lot of people, doing this,
I would agree. I would agree. Um, well, and then I would also, tell people that, they can get this beautiful hardbound copy. They can also get a softbound copy, and it's also available via ebook. Um, and it is a beautiful book. There's a lot of really cool diagrams in it. It's very well laid out. It's beautifully laid out, and I think some of the illustrations and some of the um, ways that you explain this visually are also really helpful to people to make it a little less abstract. Um, Trying to find one here, but I'm not coming across one. But yeah, I mean, you have some really good illustrations of the absolute level, especially, things. So, and you have, nice color diagrams in the book and things like that. Um, well, any other, sort of final words or thoughts here, Thomas? Anything that feels like we didn't address or touch upon?
Maybe it's good to know. I think one thing that is quite characteristic for the book is there's lots of issues I'm trying to give a taste, you get, if you walk through a store with delicious food, you have a little bit here and a little bit there, and still there, when you go there, you will have these links to the book or to internet, home pages, to get deepened into these special issues. So it's an invitation. You can go, just essential, and that might be good enough. But also you can stop there in the book, and then you go with that link and see there is something really important. You would go a little bit deeper,
Beautiful. Yeah, and I would say, it for me, it really helped tie together a lot of loose threads and help me create sort of a much more helpful meta view for myself, that I was able to see the relative and my absolute and my own practice, inside of the context of this book a lot more cleanly. And it's just been a boon. It's been a help to my practice, um, to have a really updated map. And the map isn't the territory. This isn't the practice. This isn't the insight, but it's so clearly elucidated, so clearly explained, that it just helped me clarify a lot of the parts of my own being in the practice. And I think that's really, to me, the offering, that um, this is a really contemporary, well-researched, easy to understand. This is not a work of philosophy at all. Everything is very grounded and accessible. And I think for anyone that's really serious about, in integral terms, waking up, touching the absolute and growing up, which is doing your shadow work and getting the relative cleaned up, this is a really, really, really good book for that.
Oh, great. Thank you. And I think maybe a final word that is a little bit funny, what I put into the beginning, saying you might sometimes, in this kind of English, you might sometimes hear a cow mooing, or you will smell the taste of a delicious Swiss chocolate, you know, when you have the text. So then I tell the people just relax and enjoy it, you know.
Yeah, and that's, what I found when I read it, and I think, people that are English as their first language, you know, it reads a little differently, but it is, to me, it reads in a way that has a sort of beautiful rhythm, and it, I think also for me, it helped me be in a little bit of a different mindset as I read the book. So there was a little more openness to the way that I was bringing the words into my body mind. So I still think it's a very easy read for most people. Again, this is not a work by Ken Wilber with complicated philosophy. It's to me written. One of the most powerful parts about it is that it's so accessible. It's very complicated, but it's written in a very accessible way.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was great talking to you, and again, 3 steps into oneness. You can get it now, and highly, highly, highly recommend it.
Thank you, Keith. It was a pleasure to see you and to talk about with you. And it's always learning from each other. Even if we know the book and when we talk, we might understand things even more in depth when we talk about or when we are asked to express ourselves, because this is interesting. This is an interesting aspect. That's why I like the talk too. There's something live in there. There's
Sure.
something, maybe something like mystic also happening, just
Yeah.
just uh, just spontaneous, and that's what I love about these spontaneous like talks like this with you today.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was fun and interesting, and it was a real honor to be involved in the book. So I'm glad to see it out in the world.
Thank you.